A 4,000-acre lake in North Florida is gone, not flooded, not polluted, not slowly receding, over years of drought like 100 other lakes across the American South gone, drained through a single 28-foot hole at the bottom of its own basin, 12 billion gallons of water funneling silently into the earth over the course of 5 months, while most of the country had no idea it was happening. As of this week, Lake Jackson, just outside Tallahassee, is cracked mud and stranded lily pads. The Northwest Florida Water Management District has issued only its third water shortage warning in 26 years. The National Weather Service has placed the region in extreme drought, and at the adjacent Cascade Lake cypress trees stand fully exposed in open air, marked by a band of pale bark 10 feet up their trunks, a waterline scar showing exactly where the surface used to be before the system stopped holding. But here's the detail that tells the real story. 2 men are walking around inside the sinkhole, not beside it, inside it, standing on rocks that on any normal year of the last quarter century would be submerged under more than 20 feet of lake water. They are hunting fossils on what was, until recently, the floor of one of Florida's most productive bass fishing lakes. And what they are finding down there and what the water that vanished is now doing underground is the part of this story that nobody is telling you. To understand what happened to Lake Jackson, you have to understand what Lake Jackson actually is. It is not a deep lake. It sits in a shallow limestone basin in Leon County, Florida, 8 miles northwest of the state capitol building in Tallahassee. At full pool, it covers just under 4,000 acres, about 6 square miles of open water. With an average depth of roughly 8 feet, it is warm, productive, and heavily fished. It has been a recreational anchor for the Tallahassee area for generations. It is also built on top of a drain beneath the lake floor. Florida's limestone karst geology does what limestone karst geology does. Everywhere it exists, it dissolves slowly, constantly water, moving through underground fractures, widens those fractures over time, carving channels, chambers, and conduits through the rock. In certain places along the bottom of Lake Jackson, that underground plumbing connects directly to the surface through features called sinkholes, and the largest of them, a section of the lakebed called Porter Sink, has acted as a natural drain valve for the basin across multiple cycles going back centuries. Lake Jackson has done this before. That is the first thing that surprises most people when they learn about it. This is not an unprecedented geological catastrophe. It is a recurring natural cycle documented in 1907, in 1932, in 1957, in 1982, and again in 1999. Roughly every 20 to 25 years, under the right conditions, Porter Sink opens and the lake drains into the Floridan aquifer below. The lake eventually refills, the cycle resets, but the conditions that triggered this drainage event are not what anyone predicted. And the timeline of what happened, compressed, accelerated abnormally fast, is where the story shifts from natural cycle to something that demands a closer look. The drain began during Thanksgiving week of 2025. North Florida had been in drought for months before it started. The Big Bend region, the curved coastline where the Florida peninsula meets the Panhandle, had received well below normal rainfall through the summer and fall. Stormwater stopped replenishing the basin. Evaporation kept pulling the surface level down, and on the bottom of the lake in the Porter Sink section, the sediment plug that normally seals the floor against the underground conduit below began to give way. The sediment plug is not a physical structure anyone built. It is a natural accumulation of fine particles, organic matter, clay silt that settles over the limestone opening and creates a soft seal. When water levels are high, the weight of the lake above holds that plug in place and limits downward flow. When water levels drop far enough, that pressure balance shifts, the plug becomes vulnerable. The drain beneath it pulls. On November 30th, an ecology producer at WFSU Public Media named Rob Diaz de Villiers drove to the lake at sunset. What he photographed that evening looked like a bathtub draining water cascading in a steady, accelerating flow down into the open mouth of Porter Sink, the surrounding lake surface visibly lowering as he watched. By December 2nd, the basin exposed a 28-foot cavernous drop into open rock. The drain was fully open. A brief rainstorm arrived in mid-December and partially refilled the lake for less than 2 weeks. Then the drain reasserted itself. By January 6th, the lake was down again. By March, vegetation had begun sprouting across the exposed lakebed, opportunistic grasses and sedge taking root in mud that had not seen air in years. By the time Matt Lisby and Michael Surs were photographed standing inside Porter Sink in early May, the lake had been functionally gone for 4 months, 12 billion gallons. 5 months, 28-foot hole. Now drop down past the lake floor, follow the water where it went. The Floridan aquifer system is one of the largest and most productive aquifer systems in the world. It underlies roughly 1 square miles of the southeastern United States, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, In nearly all of Florida and North Florida, the aquifer sits relatively close to the surface, separated from the ground above by varying thicknesses of limestone that in some places is solid and in other places is riddled with fractures, conduits, and cave systems carved by millennia of water movement. When Lake Jackson drains, it does not simply disappear, it enters that system 12 billion gallons of surface water carrying dissolved nutrients, organic material, sediment particles, and temperature characteristics entirely different from the deep aquifer environment, injecting into underground network that supplies drinking water to communities across a wide region of North Florida. The Northwest Florida Water Management District monitors this. They track the drainage events. They understand the mechanism. But what they are watching in real time right now is a drainage event occurring against a backdrop of conditions that are not typical of previous cycles. The drought that preceded this event was deeper and more prolonged than those preceding the 1982 or 1999 drainages. Rainfall deficits across the Big Bend region have been accumulating for longer groundwater recharge. The process by which rainwater filters down through soil and rock to replenish the aquifer has been insufficient to keep pace with both natural discharge and human withdrawal. The aquifer in parts of North Florida is lower than it has been in recorded history, and a lower aquifer means lower hydrostatic pressure pushing upward against the lake floor, which means Porter Sink is easier to open than it used to be, which means the cycle may be accelerating. The historical interval between Lake Jackson drainage events averaged roughly 20 to 25 years. The gap between 1982 and 1999 was 17 years. This event follows the 1999 drainage by 26 years within the historical range technically. But the conditions surrounding it, the drought severity, the aquifer drawdown, the speed of the drainage once it began, are producing a duration and a scale that researchers are watching carefully. Nobody is saying the cycle is broken, but nobody is saying it is entirely normal either. Walk back, up to the surface, stand at the edge of what used to be a lake. The exposed lakebed of Lake Jackson is a strange and disorienting landscape, cracked mud plates curled at the edges like dried paint. Stretch across what was recently open water. Stranded aquatic vegetation, lily pads, pondweed hydrilla lies flat and browning the sun. Fish that could not escape the shrinking water fast enough died in the shallows and left their bones in the silt, but the lakebed is not empty of life. It is transforming. Wading birds that normally work the shoreline edges have moved to the center of the exposed basin, where isolated pools of remaining water concentrate the fish that survive. Shorebirds that never had access to the interior of the lake now pick across acres of newly exposed mudflat terrestrial. Insects are colonizing the cracked sediment. The ecosystem is not dying, it is reorganizing around a completely different physical reality. This too is part of the cycle that lake ecologists have documented. When Lake Jackson refills as it has after every previous drainage event, the temporary terrestrial phase produces a flush of nutrients into the water column that drives explosive biological productivity. The fishing rebounds, the vegetation grows back denser. The lake in some measurable ways is healthier after a drainage event than before one, but that historical pattern assumed a refill. Time scale of months, not years. It assumed rainfall patterns capable of rebuilding a 12 billion gallon lake within a relatively short window after the drain closed. The drain is not closed yet. The aquifer is still pulling. The drought has not broken, and there is no reliable forecast suggesting that the rainfall needed to trigger Porter Sink's resealing is coming in the near term. The lake bed is drying. Here is what the data does not tell you. It does not tell you when the drain closes, Porter Sink seals, when the sediment plug reestablishes itself, a process that requires sustained inflow of fine particles carried by incoming water settling over the limestone opening at the right rate. That process cannot be scheduled, it cannot be forced. It happens when conditions allow it on a timeline that is entirely determined by rainfall inflow rate and the geometry of the underground conduit below. It does not tell you what the aquifer looks like on the receiving end. 12 billion gallons of warm, nutrient-rich surface water entering a cold, chemically distinct underground system does not simply blend and disappear. It moves, it follows the conduit paths the limestone carved, it arrives somewhere. Monitoring wells across the region are tracking it, watching for changes in water chemistry and pressure that indicate where the pulse of surface water has traveled. It does not tell you what happens if the next rainfall cycle is insufficient. If the aquifer does not recharge at pace with both this event and ongoing withdrawal, demands the pressure dynamics that kept Porter Sink sealed during dry periods become permanently altered. The threshold for future drainage events drops, the cycle shortens. What was once a once-per-generation event becomes something more frequent, triggered by drought. Conditions that in the current climate pattern are becoming less exceptional than they used to be. And it does not tell you what else is moving. Beneath the cracked mud of the lake bed, beneath 28-foot mouth of Porter Sink beneath the limestone conduit carrying the lake's water into the deep aquifer, the karst system continues doing what it has always done, dissolving, expanding, opening new fractures, creating new potential voids where stable ground currently exists. The sinkhole that drained Lake Jackson is a known feature. It has a name. It has been monitored for decades. The next one does not have a name yet. It does not have a monitoring station. It does not have a documented history. It is a fracture somewhere in the limestone beneath Leon County that has been quietly widening for an unknown number of years in a location no one has mapped at a depth no surface instrument can see. The water table is dropping. The pressure holding those fractures closed from below is dropping with it. And somewhere in the karst beneath North Florida, the geometry of that equation is approaching a threshold that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Matt Lisby and Michael Sears walked into a sinkhole that opened 28 feet into the earth and found fossils from a world that existed before human memory. The question is not whether another one opens, the question is where, and whether anyone is standing on top of it when it does. The drain at Porter Sink is still pulling, the aquifer is still receiving, the water is still moving underground somewhere beneath your feet, following paths carved in rock over thousands of years, and the system has not finished yet.